Show.
Welcome to the Bobby O Show. My name is Bob Potzner. I'm affiliated with the law firm of Collins Hannafin, PC in Danbury, Connecticut. And I have a show today for you which is a very interesting topic. It's a topic I know very little about, and I'm relying upon my experts here to talk about this topic. It's going to be about animal protection and animal advocacy. But before I introduce the guests, before I talk about the show, I want to make a dedication today for the show to the late partner of mine, Francis Collins. He was a founding father of Collins Hannafin. He passed away unexpectedly earlier this week at the age of 92. Fran was a wonderful human being, a great lawyer, and he had the ability to have everyone seem to like him. I, as a litigator, don't have that strength, but he was a great lawyer. He ran for lieutenant governor many, many years ago, and I want to wish him and his family, may he rest in peace. God bless you, Fran Collins. Now let's talk about my show today. I have two phenomenal guests. I have a professor from the University of Connecticut, Jessica Rubin. Hello, Jessica, how are you?
Good, thank you for being here.
And I have a lawyer I've known for many, many years. He's with Collins, he's with Cohen & Wolf, which is down the street from my office in Danbury. A firm I have a great respect for, Ken Bernard, who also are going to both talk about the issues I mentioned to the start of the show, animal protection and animal advocacy. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. And we also have a third guest who was an unexpected guest for me today. And Ken, what is this guest's name?
This puppy is named Faye, and she's a Fidelco guide dog. Fidelco is located in Bloomfield, Connecticut, and my wife and I have been raising guide dogs for them since 1989.
And for those who don't know, before I introduce you two folks, what's the purpose of a guide dog?
To help people who have sight issues to navigate through life. I got a call just the other day from one of our clients who was in college, and she said, I've never been more free in my life. I finally have a life that I can enjoy with my guide dog from Fidelco.
Well, thank you for bringing my unexpected guest, because Faye is sitting here and will probably let us know if she does or doesn't like the show. Jessica, may I call you Jessica?
Please.
Okay, Jessica, a little bit about your background, please.
Sure. I am an associate dean at UConn Law School, but I'm also a professor and the director of the Animal Law Clinic at UConn. And how I got there, like anybody, is a journey. I started out as a corporate and securities lawyer in a large Manhattan firm, then Stanford firm, and was hired and started at UConn to teach primarily negotiation, interviewing, counseling, and writing, and pretty quickly transitioned to teaching animal law. And in the course of teaching that course, came upon a sobering statistic about animal cruelty cases and how they typically don't land, are not prosecuted fully, and got together with former State Representative Diana Urban to introduce a law that we thought could help change that statistic. And I know we'll be talking a lot about Connecticut's court advocate law. And that law has really launched a wonderful program in the state, and it's the law under which our clinic operates. So we've been operating for 10 years and have had 225 cases in which we've served as court advocates.
Phenomenal. In your resume, and you're being very humble because you have a very long resume, a lot of things you've done. I noticed that you were you were a speaker at an animal law symposium in 2021 in New Jersey, literally almost 4 years from today. What was that about?
So that symposium, like many, was a symposium to introduce the idea of court advocates to other states. So animal law is a growing field, and one piece of it is this idea that humans can present animals' experiences and interests to courts. And Connecticut's been the first state to have a law and a program like that, followed by Maine, and then other states are interested in doing similar programming and legislation.
Thank you very much. By the way, I've done a couple of shows on coercive control, which is control by one spouse against the other in domestic situation. And although it's different than the cruelty to animals, obviously, it's a similar situation in terms of treating people or animals the way people should not be treated?
So interestingly, a couple of years ago, the state legislature added threatened or actual harm to animals as one type of coercive control. So that's a really
Very, very interesting. We'll come back to this now.
Yeah.
Ken Bernard, tell me about yourself, Ken.
I spent 23 years in the military. I joined Cohen and Wolf in only 4 years of active duty. I taught at West Point. I joined Goldstein and Peck in 1974.
That was a great firm in Bridgeport, Connecticut, right?
It was indeed, yes. I was
Great. So
very
there were
honored.
some great lawyers in that era. There were some phenomenal lawyers in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Arnie Bai, for example, was there. A whole lot of. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but he just Goldstein and Peck rings a bell.
Absolutely. And then I joined Cohen and Wolf in 1999. I was honored to be in the legislature representing Westport for 8 years. So I got the feel of being in the legislature, and I'm honored to be here today with Jessica because I know the kind of good work that she does at the university, but particularly in the legislature. For her and Diane Urban to have gotten that bill through was a major success. Most bills take at least 3 years to work their way up and become a priority. Jessica, with her skill set, managed to get the bill through much quicker than that.
And the bill you're referring to is the so-called Desmond's Law.
Desmond's Law, which
Yeah.
is named after a dog that was horribly abused.
And I want to do a few more things. You're also being humble about your background. I did not know you were in the military. I want to thank you for your service. I do that to anyone I see who's in the military. My dad was in the Navy. He used to say the gravy's in the Navy. And I think he would have preferred I would have gone to the Naval Academy versus Yale when I was undergraduate, but that was not my style. I also know that you were, just to be a little more specific, you were a member of the Judge Advocate General Corps. You taught law, constitutional law at West Point.
I did.
And you also were involved in international law as well.
I teach abroad.
Yeah, tell me about that a little bit, please.
I got one of those emails that you would delete, and it was asking for senior attorneys, and so it got my attention, and I applied, and I've been honored to be part of the Center for International Legal Studies. They're located in Salzburg, Austria, and they coordinate or organize my being able to teach at law schools abroad, where I teach constitutional law as well. I've been pleased to be able to teach in 11 different law schools from Latvia to Mongolia, and it's just a treat.
And a different show, not today. This is a perfect time to ask you a lot of questions as a judge advocate, but I won't get to those topics today. It's a different show because I want to deal with the dog situation. But I also noticed in your resume that you were on the Westport Dangerous Dog Committee.
Yes.
That was from 2010 to the present. Tell me about what that committee does.
A lot of people feel that the dog animal control officer has too much power insofar as they control what will happen when the dog gets involved in a violent incident. And so Westport, to its credit, establishes this committee where a dog owner can say, I think the animal control officer has exceeded his authority. And there's a panel, myself as a lawyer, we have a vet, and we have a layperson who sit on the panel, and you have a hearing as to whether the dog should be disposed of if it's a violent act or there's some less severe outcome from an act of violence. And I think Westport may be the only town that has one.
Richfield is where I lived. We had a dog who would not respect the electric fence. So our dog, Kobe, would run through it, and I probably got phone calls 10 times in a short period of time because the dog would wander. And one time we got a ticket and I had to go to court. And all the judges I see every day and my litigation partners really gave me a rough time teasing me.
They should.
They should have done that. And finally, you did mention briefly the Fidelco Guide Dog Foundation that you're on the board of directors of. How was that? What was it formation? What was it formed for?
My wife and I, we got a solicitation for money, and I called the organization. I said, is there something else you can do? Because dogs and people, combination, I love dogs and actively help people. And this seemed to be a blend, and they said you could become a foster parent if you'd like, and that means that you take the dog for the first year of its life, do all the heavy lifting, and then you have to give it back where it's professionally trained and then placed. We've done 11 of them.
Very good. So you can see, ladies and gentlemen, that I have guests who are very, very interested in dogs. Faye is a little sleepy here right now, So I will try not to, oh, just got up. Thank you. Faye heard his name.
That's
Her
as
name.
bad as she gets.
That's as bad as she gets. Okay. Better
I take
behave.
her everywhere, and if I don't, people complain.
Really? Well, I'm glad you brought Faye today.
Thank you for having her.
Thank you. Jessica, let's talk more about your position at the University of Connecticut. Tell me more about the clinic that you run.
Sure. So our clinic operates under Connecticut's court advocate law, and our clinic trains students on how to serve as court-appointed advocates. Under Connecticut's law, advocates can be either law students under supervision or private volunteer lawyers, which Ken will speak to, I'm sure. So under the law, our students appear as advocates in animal cruelty cases, and our clinic really equips them with the skills to do that. So we teach them how to conduct investigations, how to communicate in a professional manner with law enforcement personnel, judges, prosecutors, public defenders. Of course, they appear in court to present their recommendations and information, both in writing and orally. But I think one of the greatest skills that the clinic teaches is professionalism and communication off the record, right? The hallway lawyering, the conversations with prosecutors, conversations sometimes with defense lawyers and their clients. And so that kind of off-the-record conversation is very important, and I find very difficult for students to get comfortable with. And so we teach them how to do that whole range of skills.
Don't be offended when I say this, but I don't think law school teaches people how to be lawyers. It teaches how to think like lawyers, but no one told me in law school I had to get clients. No one told me about those kinds of things. And the thing you mentioned about being in the courtroom, Ken would say this as a litigator also, before COVID, I was in court 3 or 4 days a week at least, not always on trial, but going to court for this matter, that matter. And you'd see lawyers in the courtroom and say, hey, Sally, hey, Jimmy, we have that case that's not on the calendar today, but remember that point? Can we talk about settling the case? And practicing law as a litigator was a whole lot more fun, in my opinion. Ken may have a different opinion than that.
No, I agree.
You know, and the younger lawyers, you know, the people you're teaching now will never have the experience of going to like what we call it short calendar. Short calendars were all these little matters that come up. It used to be every Monday. And I'd go, if certain lawyers were going to be presenting, I'd go and watch them. You know, and even as I got to be a more experienced lawyer, there were certain lawyers who were top notch in our field. You probably did the same thing. If anyone calling a Wolf, some of your senior, Marty Wolf, for example, and those gentlemen, if I knew Marty was going to argue something, I'd want to go watch. They don't have that nowadays. And that's why the statute that was passed and what your clinic is doing is so wonderful, because it gives students a chance to not read it in the book. Any comments on what I just said?
Sure. In the last 25 years, there's been a whole wave of emphasizing experiential education, you know, coming from the ABA and the McCrate report and the Carnegie report, emphasizing the need for students to learn not through the books only, but also through doing. So UConn's Animal Clinic is one of 14 of our clinics, and I think students are recognizing the importance of learning by doing. But I do remember short calendar days and being sent there, being promised nothing was going to happen, and of course something always significant happened, and you had to stand up and improvise.
There was the old expression, ready until reached. Ready until reached, which is the thing we'd keep in our back pocket, which meant essentially, yes, Judge, I'm ready for the hearing. Oh, right now? No, not right in this very, very minute. Ken, any comments about what we just talked about? Anything?
Oh, it's absolutely essential. I also teach a course on the 50 things they don't teach you in law school. And it recites a lot of the things that I think we're referring to. If you don't have courtroom experience, you really are not a full lawyer. You've just got to be in the courtroom to know what it's like. Even if you never see a courtroom, after you've had that experience, you know what it's like. And when someone threatens, I'll sue you, you know not to be intimidated any longer because you know what the experience is like.
Tomorrow I'm going to be judging, the Connecticut Bar Association has an annual mock trial. And I've been picked to be one of the judges in the local court system, and it goes throughout the state till the championship round. And what these kids learn, and I was shocked last year when I judged to see the kinds of intellect and abilities these kids were having. These are juniors and seniors in high school, although there are programs for the college kids as well. And it was a great experience for me.
Oh, so, I've done it. You're going to enjoy it very much.
Yeah, I'm actually presiding judge, so I better wear a robe.
Yes.
So let's go back to the statute. We've hinted about the statute. The statute, as I understand it, and I was corrected when I mentioned the other day in our prep show, this was going to be about animal rights. And it's not about animal rights necessarily. Your program is really about, and the statute is about animal protection and animal advocacy. Can you distinguish for me how that's different than animal rights?
Sure, a conversation about animal rights would really be an ethical conversation that really questions the relationship between non-human animals and humans, right? Can we eat them? Can we experiment on them? Can we use them? So that would be a rights-based conversation. I think what Ken and I are going to talk about is instead advocating for animals, and that could include their rights. But in the case of Connecticut's court advocate law, we're talking about ensuring that our animal cruelty statutes, which exist, are vigorously enforced.
What training do you give these law students at UConn to become an advocate?
So they have a full semester of training, and some of it is substantive, right? Examining the animal cruelty statute, the statutes governing Connecticut's diversionary programs, and some of it is experiential, right? Teaching them the skills of how to read a police report carefully, how to make their argument in court, how to speak with a judge in an office versus in the courtroom. So we mix substantive and skills training together in the clinic. And that's the beautiful thing about clinical education. They're learning while they're doing, but they're applying the substantive information.
Now, are they allowed to speak to the judge in the court process?
Yes, so under Connecticut practice rules, students who have finished their first year of law school can appear in court under supervision.
That's like Legally Blonde, the movie Legally Blonde. Sort of. So let's talk a little bit about...
I didn't get the reference right away.
The reference is that she's, the law student
I remember.
spoke. Now I got it back. If I'm going too fast, Ken, you let me know. In any event, we're having a good time, folks, at least I am, and Faye's having a great time. So let's go to the statute. It's section 54-86N as in Nancy. And the statute is called Appointment of Advocate in Proceeding where the welfare or custody of a cat or dog, come back to that in a second. Advocates' duties, Department of Agriculture to maintain list of eligible advocates. My first question is, the title of the statute says cats or dogs. Does this statute apply beyond cats or dogs? Ken, do you want to comment that, or either one of you?
The statute says what it says, but I've been an advocate in many instances when it involves other animals. It can be rabbits, birds, farm animals, horses. I don't think the court distinguishes when they have an animal abuse case. They want an advocate in the courtroom to advocate for the victim. They call upon an animal advocate, regardless of whether it's whether beyond a dog and a cat.
Very important also. Now, Jessica, you were involved, am I correct, in having this statute passed? Were you involved in the process?
Was it involved in the process from drafting to passage?
So tell me, before the statute was passed, how did it come about that you had the idea to have a statute put in place?
So in teaching an animal law course, like not a clinic, but a course, 1 week was always devoted to criminal law. And I would always bring in former state rep Diana Urban to talk about animal cruelty cases, and together we would look at the data. And the class would leave, and Diana and I would sit together and scratch our heads and drink some coffee and say, what could we do about this problem of a high rate of dismissals that we saw in animal cruelty cases?
Dismissal means?
Meaning that the case will no longer be prosecuted, or, yeah.
The judge didn't bother dealing with it. Essentially, the case is done, no decision was made, it's just done.
It's a combination of judge decisions and prosecutorial decisions.
Did you find, without criticizing prosecutors, did you find a reluctance in prosecutors to perhaps push these kinds of cases? Not
animal cruelty cases specifically, but when you go to court, criminal court, and you see the volume of cases, right? The prosecutors, it's too many cases for them to even carry. They come in with shopping carts, so many files. And so you can understand why certain cases might fall to the bottom of the pile. And so one of the goals of having court advocates is to bring those files up in the stack. So
you're having coffee with your friend,
right?
And you decided we got to do something about this.
Got to do something, and
damn it, we got to do something about this,
right? And what resources do I have at my disposal? Law students. And we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could have a free extra resource given to courts to help them handle these cases? And we thought, how about we send law students and volunteer lawyers in to offer a third perspective, not the prosecutors, not the defense lawyers, but a third perspective that's focused on the animal victim.
It's almost analogous in domestic litigation to a guardian ad litem, and that's essentially someone to act for the best interests of, in this case, the dog. I think it was a brilliant idea. And so how did you go from thinking about it to, because what did Roosevelt say? Actions do indeed speak louder than words. How did you get the ball rolling?
So Diana is a very, very well-respected legislator, and so she was able to champion the process on that side. A few interesting issues came up through the legislative process, compromises that we had to make, and I can speak to those if you're interested. But one question was posed by someone on the Judiciary Committee. Well, let's say we do this. How do we know that we're going to have a supply of advocates at the ready to be appointed in cases? So at that point, I had been at UConn for about 20 years and had developed a decent amount of goodwill. And I remember going to my then dean, Timothy Fisher, and I said, could we please put the law school behind this? Or can I say to the legislature that the law school will supply this is a strange photo to be up at this point, so we can take that away.
It's not the
Oh,
photo.
thank
The photo
you.
is not on this. The screen
Thank
is
you.
over there. I don't think it is.
I said, can we put the law school behind this? And can I say in my testimony that the law school will supply a stream of law students? And I said, literally, I said, all the chips that I may have accumulated with you of goodwill over the years, I'm now sliding them across the table. And he agreed. And I think that was really helpful for the legislature
And
here.
think back when we were in law school. I would have jumped it down at Duke to have a class of clinic.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, I mean, to do something. Oh God, I'm a real lawyer. I'm going to
Exactly.
court, and to go to court. I once had a summer associate many years ago who had done all the research. Was a brilliant young lady, and she wanted to argue some points. So I went to the judge in chambers with opposing counsel. I said, "Do you mind if so and so makes a pitch?" And the judge said, "As long as you're in charge, Bob, that's fine." And this person still remembers that story about going to court.
To elevate, however, the need for an advocate, and it doesn't take a long time when you're in court and talking to prosecutors, it's beyond just the victim in the particular case. Serial killers almost always have animal abuse in their history. When you point that out and you look at the kind of cases that I've seen witness to, you've got to sensitize the people in the judicial system. This may be a broader issue than just the an animal being abused. We need to look at this a little bit more deeply. Spousal abusers, elder abusers, people who abuse children, almost always have started by abusing pets.
That's very interesting. So I'm going to jump from the statute. We'll come back to the statute. Let's talk about the mental health of who would go out. Well, we have a Secretary of Homeland Security who would shoot her dog in the head, but who would emotionally, mentally harm a dog? Are there any studies that you're both aware of?
A lot of studies, a whole field of psychology. I can just say generally, sometimes animal cruelty comes about from a lack of resources, lack of knowledge. Sometimes it's a function of the offender's upbringing, right? Maybe they were desensitized or cruelty was normalized because somebody was brought up as either a victim of abuse themselves or in an environment where they were taught that animals, they don't have empathy for animals because animals may not suffer in the same way as they. And sometimes it's a function of a mental health disorder, whether it is severe OCD, sometimes in the case of animal hoarding, or anger management issues or substance abuse issues. So it really comes about from a variety of factors, and I don't think anyone has pinpointed, one driving mental health condition that causes animal cruelty.
You want to add to that, Ken?
Well, when I get an animal abuse case and I'm involved, I have to look at what's the underlying cause of this. And it could be poverty, it could be stupidity. It isn't necessarily malicious or a mental illness. You have to discriminate that as to how much you're going to commit your energy, time and energy to getting the outcome that you think is the appropriate one. If someone leaves an animal in a car in the heat, they could be charged, often are charged with animal cruelty. But when you look at the facts and realize the dog is otherwise well taken care of, it was a slip, it was a mistake, you don't necessarily want to commit that person to have a record of animal abuse, which will forever follow them. So you try to use your judgment. But when you have a case, as I did once, when a woman let 4 dogs that she rescued starve to death in her living room, and was discovered by virtue of a serviceman smelling the odor from the decomposing bodies, that's a whole nother kind of case.
Sure.
Where your advocacy really becomes important. You make certain you're in court on the days those cases are called, and you bring hopefully you don't necessarily, but as Jessica pointed out, they have the prosecutors have a big caseload and with serious.
I explain to my clients in cases. If I have a 3-day trial, for example, I'll say to my client, you're better off settling. This is in divorce cases, for example,
Sure.
because the judge is going to hear you for a day or 2 or 3 and has a heavy load, and you've lived your life for 25 or 30 years. And that's why you should try to resolve things appropriately. Before I go back to the statute, I'd like you to go, Ken, when you do some talks on this topic, you've given me some information about description of abuse to animals. And you want to talk about that a little bit, and then we'll get back, Jessica, to the statute itself. Would you mind, Ken?
The kind of cases that I've had?
Yeah, the kind of things you've experienced about with animals, in terms of the kinds of damages that have been done to injuries to animals.
A husband and wife, they raise chickens. They decide to get a divorce. They're your chickens. No, they're your chickens. The chickens were starved to death. Nobody took care of the chickens. You have a fellow who had 70 animals. His mother was ill. He left them alone, went to Portugal, decided to stay for a month, left nobody behind to take care of the animals. Oh. You have a pet store owner who is in New York, keeps his birds in a shed outside his house. The smell from the neighbors called in the animal control. The feces was this high under the cages, had just left them alone with no water or food. They were dropping on the floor. I mean, you can't imagine the kinds of cruelty that people are committing. But a lot of people make mistakes that don't rise to the kind of cruelty I just described. And you have to distinguish between those two. But each case is heart-wrenching.
So let's take that and go back to your creating the statute and helping to devise the statute and draft the statute. Were there hearings that had to be attended by you when they were going to adopt the legislation?
Sure. We had public hearings each time the bill was introduced, and each time a student accompanied me. And the student perspective was great because, students were excited about the possibility of handling these kind of cases because it gives them both practical skills training in court, but also an opportunity for students and private counsel to do very impactful, meaningful work. And so I've had students who have taken the clinic and graduated and come back to serve as volunteer advocates because it is very gratifying work.
I actually do my homework, and I went through your website, and I have some comments about, I'm going to read some things that it says about the Animal Law Clinic, because I was very impressed with the way the clinic has been set up. It says, law students enrolled in the Animal Law Clinic advocate for the interests of justice in cases of animal cruelty. Clinic participants are appointed by the court under a groundbreaking Connecticut law to appear in court proceedings, conduct factual and legal research, and present recommendations to the court. Ken, for a young law student to be able to make recommendations that are listened to,
Of course.
is amazing. It's just an amazing situation.
And you have a situation where a prosecutor may ask the advocate, I'm too busy to focus on this case. Could you give me a hand? Could you talk to the veterinarian? Could you get the vet bills? Could you write a memo for me? Could you do some research for me? All of a sudden you are involved in the criminal student particularly involved in the criminal justice system, and the prosecutor is relying on you for assistance. You're in the system. It's a fabulous experience.
I once had a divorce case many, many years ago in which the issue was who got the dog. And I had the client who wanted the dog.
Yeah.
And we fought for the dog. We argued for the dog, and we got the dog. 3 months later, I got a phone call from that client. I don't want the dog anymore. Can you give it back to the other side? I said, well, your new counsel will have to take care of that because I'm out of this case.
Right.
And I'm not being flip about that, but you have responsibilities if you're going to, do these kinds of things. Last comment I want to go back to is that it says, the Animal Law Clinic focuses on teaching students how to actively participate in the legal system as court-appointed advocates for justice in animal cruelty cases. Students access case files, which is amazing, in a positive way. Interview veterinarian and law enforcement experts. Interviewing expert witnesses is a skill, and to have that opportunity, which I'm sure with the guidance of the professor, is amazing. perform legal research, which none of us want to do. We have to delegate it to someone. I haven't done research in a long time, even though I have my statute book right here in case I need it. So these are wonderful things. And so the statute, as far as I'm concerned, has two phenomenal aspects. One is the training of the students we've talked about, and two is protecting the animal. So let's talk about the statute itself. So you got the statute approved. You testified a couple of times, or did it go unanimously? Was it a partisan vote?
So it passed on the third time, not unanimous, not clearly partisan. You know, it was a mix.
What was those who did not support this particular bill? It was passed in 2016, am I right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
What was the rationale of those who did not want to approve this? I think, I was going to say innocuous, that's the wrong word. This self-preserving for this young dog here. Why were they against it?
So I can't attribute any reasoning to particular legislators,
Sure.
but what I can share is some of the arguments that were raised in public hearings. One was from the Connecticut Dog Foundation and the State Veterinary Medical Association, which raised two concerns. One was that it would confuse the legal status of animals to create this, to which my response was, the court advocate law doesn't change the underlying cruelty law, in that it doesn't change what an owner can do to their animal. Right? The cruelty law is there, and that governs that. The court advocate law only says if you do violate the cruelty statute, there's this extra resource.
So there's a criminal statute about cruelty to animals.
Right.
Okay? Boy, I hear the logic of some people. I just don't understand the confusion part, but so be it. So
If you're an animal lover, it's hard to understand the rationale to vote against this bill.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot of, that's right. You said exactly well. What were the other positions?
A second concern was that this statute would create legal personhood for animals and make them parties in cases. And to that, you know, the response was the advocate represents the interests of justice. The advocate does not represent a party, the animal. So we're not going there. We're not going to legal personhood, which is a big ask in the animal rights movement right now.
Sorry.
So those were the two major objections. And there were compromises along the way. For example, the first draft that I submitted of the statute said, you know, it could be in any animal cruelty case. And the sage advice of Diana Urban was to let it, you know, there were some legislators who said we don't want it to apply in livestock cases, for example. And Diana's advice was let it pass with cats and dogs, and in the future we can expand it to all animals. And in fact, in the last couple of years, there have been some legislative efforts to expand it to all animals.
Is there any funding, Ken, that you know of for this program?
I'm not aware of any.
Jessica?
The program is cost-free to the judicial branch, and lawyers either volunteer or students do the work for credit.
Is there any 501c3 support so that if people want to contribute to this cause, if there's a need?
Sure. Can I make a plug here? So
No, it's not a plug, it's just reality.
Sure.
If someone wants to learn about the organization and maybe make contributions, and we're not here advocating to get money, but if you happen during this Christmas season when it's deductible.
Wonderful.
Okay. So I get a nickel, an ice cream cone for that?
UConn has a foundation, a 501c3, and that has a sub-account for the Animal Law Clinic, so that can receive donations.
And that's probably for investigations and those kinds of things, not to pay anybody.
Mileage to and from courts, costs, not payment.
So let's talk about the statute itself. By the way, has the statute been amended since 2016?
It has not.
Okay. Were there amendments that you'd like to see to the statute?
To expand it from dogs and cats to all animals would be great. I think some clarification on the role of advocates could help, but I think to me the only pressing thing is expanding it to all animal cases. But as Ken said, in practice, advocates get appointed in cases involving all sorts of animals, even wildlife.
Okay, I'm going to go through the statute literally line by line so people, and I'll stop along the way so people can understand what the statute's all about. I think it's really, I mean, when I met Ken that day and saying, I'm doing animal protection, I didn't realize what I was talking to him about. And I'm very impressed with what's being done. I may even volunteer. Okay, you may not want me though. Okay, here we go. The statute says essentially, and I put my glasses on to make sure I don't read it improperly. In any prosecution under section 53-247 or any court proceeding pursuant to 22-329A. Now, what do those sections refer to?
So the first statute is the state's criminal animal cruelty statute, And the second one is a provision that allows a state or town municipality to seize an animal when there is suspected imminent animal cruelty. So it used to be called civil forfeiture, but the appropriate term now is a civil welfare proceeding. It's not a criminal matter, it's a civil matter.
So those are the kinds of cases that you'd be getting involved in, is that correct? Okay. And then it says, it does say cats or dogs, and we've addressed that issue already. The court may order, upon its own initiative, that'd be sua sponte, the judge can decide, that they'll make an order, or upon request of a party counsel or counsel for a party, that a separate advocate be appointed to represent the interests of justice. Several things here. First of all, I don't want to step on a zero, by the way. I'm going to move a little bit. It says in interest of justice. Why does it say interest of justice versus interest of the animal? Do you have
I
any
think we
thoughts?
can all relate to justice. It does. You don't have to relate it to just an animal. We like justice. I think as a society in America, justice is a pursuit, and it's a catch-all phrase that I think most people can relate to.
Do you have any comments?
Sure. Right now, animals are not legal persons,
Right.
so they can't be represented. So the phrase that we settled on was interests of justice. In practice, so at the time we made that compromise, it was very frustrating to me. In practice, it's been a wonderful term because it allows us to consider broader interests, not just of the victim animal, who most often is deceased. And so that would be the end of our consideration if it was that we represented the animal. Interest of justice allows us to consider other potential victims, community safety, human victims. So in practice, it's been a very broad term.
Okay, thank you. By the way, any comments? If you have any things you want to say about the statute that I passed by, please jump in, okay? Then it says, here's another thing. How does someone get on the list to be a victim, to be representing the dog's interests?
They register with the State Department of Ag. Ag maintains a list on their website, and when they register, they need to sort of show their experience and interest in animal law.
Very good. If a court orders that an advocate be appointed to represent the interests of justice, the court shall appoint such advocate from a list provided by the Commissioner of Agriculture. Why Commissioner of Agriculture?
They were willing to collaborate at the time we were drafting, and they said, sure, we'll host the list.
You're a practical young lady. There you go.
Our goal was to make this have zero fiscal impact, right?
Yeah.
And so ideally, it would be a separate office within the judicial branch with training and a paid staff. But at the time we were introducing this, we were very conscious to make it fiscally neutral.
Ken, any comments you want to make along the way?
No, I agree.
Wholeheartedly. Okay. A decision by the court denying a request to appoint a separate advocate to represent the interests of justice shall not be subject to appeal. That was interesting. Why is that in there?
They want, judges want discretion, and I remember the conversation during the hearing about this, and they wanted to know that they wouldn't have to appoint advocates.
Actually, it makes sense. It makes sense, although, because what you call interlocutory judgments, in other words, you have to have a final decision to appeal, it'd be silly to have that right along the way. Also, it might delay justice, delayed is justice denied, so to speak.
I've never found a judge unwilling to appoint an advocate. From my experience, an advocate is an asset both to the judiciary and to the state's attorney's office. And so if you find someone who's willing to participate as an advocate, it's welcomed.
I'd agree with you I haven't done these kinds of cases, but in any case I've been in, if you have something that someone who's going to add, an expert witness, for example, in a custody case who talks about what the kid's best interest is, usually the judges want to hear that information because it helps get to the end result. So I think.
Can I take you back to your phrase, justice delayed is justice denied?
Yes.
So compelling in animal cases where often an animal has been seized and is sitting in a state or town shelter. And truly, some of these cases linger for 2 to 3 years, during which time that animal is living in a cage. And so justice delayed is really justice denied for animals.
And that's where an advocate can make a real difference, because the prosecutor, the judge isn't aware of what's going on, where the animal is. If you come into court and say, Your Honor, I've got this situation, you can put a lot of pressure on the defense counsel They want to look good. They want their case disposed of as favorably as possible. The fact that they leave the animal as evidence in a cage for some period of time does not play well to the judiciary. And you can often get them to forfeit their ownership interest as the case is being resolved. And so you've protected the animal while the system is going.
Jessica, would your pictures be appropriate right now in this conversation at this point?
If you'd like.
Sure. I'm asking my director to put the 3 photos. We'll do one at a time. Go ahead.
Sure. These illustrate some of the value that advocates can add in cases. So in one case, the defendant was charged with cruelty to 8 pit bulls who were found in pretty rough conditions that suggested they were being used for fighting. The defendant wasn't charged with fighting. At the first opportunity, so we were appointed, and pretty soon the defendant applied for what's called a diversionary program. One of the factors that a court considers in determining whether or not to approve an application for a diversionary program is how serious the charges, how serious the offenses were. So in this case, we were able to make an argument in writing and in person in court saying this was serious, and we supplemented our written submission with printed copies. The way this case came about was also through odors emanating from a residence. So the state police arrived with professional photographers thinking they were coming upon a human crime scene. So the police report contained high quality photos of the animals and their conditions. And so we were able to provide those photos to the court, printed out, so that when the court was deciding about the diversionary program application, the judge commented saying, I remember those photos. This was far too serious. Same case a few months later, and you can advance to the next photo.
Next photo, please.
The defendant applied for something else, and in support of that application, the defendant provided purported letters from animal rescue organizations thanking him for his volunteer work, thanking him for his donations. Now, I'm terrible with social media, but my students took those letters and ran them down on social media, contacted the organizations, and it turns out that those organizations did not exist. And we were able to present that information to the court to say, you know, this is not accurate. This is not valid information. So that kind of factual investigation is something that is very ripe for an advocate. I also just want to give you one more example. Mm-hmm. A third case.
Different photo? Or
different photo, please.
Next photo, please.
This was low-level cruelty, nothing egregious like that, but instead a 25-year pattern of town and state officials going out, writing tickets, writing reports, but the town that was investigating this individual who was running a backyard breeding operation didn't actually have a computer. So literally they had a binder of reports on this individual, and then the state had its own big thick file of written reports. So nobody could make sense of the file, nobody could appreciate what was going on. A student of mine sat in a room for several hours, synthesized all the information, wrote a nice, neat timeline that allowed the state and the judge and the defense lawyer to appreciate that while there was no egregious cruelty, it was a long-standing pattern of cruelty such that, you know, they were willing to make the charges and advance the case.
Sure, and when a judge is making a decision, if it's the first time of any kind of crime activity, if you're a shoplifter, the first time you may get a slap on the wrist. If it's a 15th time, it's a different story. By the way, you mentioned diversionary program. Are you referring to accelerated rehabilitation?
So there are quite a few, I think over 12 diversionary programs in Connecticut. The ones that we see in animal cruelty cases are accelerated rehabilitation and the supervised diversionary program for defendants who claim they had psychiatric conditions at the time of the offense. So we see those two.
I ask that, Ken, because we call it AR, and I did criminal law many years ago. I don't do it anymore. And the AR program, as you know, right, Ken, that required that there be notice given to the victim. Right. And when I was reading about this advocacy program, I'm saying, well, wait a minute, who's going to advocate for the dog? And then I saw the advocacy situation, and now there's a person to take a position for the judge. Is that correct, Ken?
And it's required that they, if I'm involved in a case and they go for AR, I have to be notified for it.
And what criteria, when you're deciding if you're going to say, yes, I have no objection, or I have objection to the AR procedure? And AR, to folks who are listening or watching, means that if the court grants the AR, there will be a lot lesser negative impact in terms of court proceedings than if you go to court, you go to jail for 3 days or whatever.
You go on probation for a maximum of 2 years. And at the end of 2 years, if you haven't gotten in trouble, your case is dismissed and you have no record.
So what criteria do you use in terms of deciding whether you're going to recommend for AR or not?
Experience and judgment. You know, I try to make my own assessment as to whether I think it is a serious crime and whether the person is unlikely to offend again. And that's not as difficult as it may sound.
Yeah, and we make decisions, all three of us, as
course.
lawyers and professors, whatever, every day
Surely.
on cases. And I think also AR, as I recall, can also be a situation where, Judge, I'll agree to recommend AR if conditions A, B, C, and D are put in place. Is that correct, Ken?
Absolutely. If they if it's a dog that's been abused and is in a kennel, they have to give up the ownership of the dog so it can be placed in a humane setting. That would be one. Or, in fact, in one of my cases, where the crime was particularly egregious, I had the fellow spend 45 days in jail before his case was heard. He didn't post his bail on agreement. He wouldn't post bail. He spent 45 days in jail. When he came out, I said, now I won't oppose your application for AR because you've at least paid a penalty. And in another case, I extracted a fine of a volunteer contribution of $25,000 to the local ACO's office. So you can, AR is a great program if you're charged with a crime to avoid having a criminal record. And today, having a criminal record is a real liability.
Easily found out. Easily found out.
Yeah, and so if you think you're eligible or you want it as the part of the judicial process, you can extract punishment of a more appropriate nature. We only punish people with fines and incarceration. Many times the people who are being fined don't have the money to pay it, and they don't pay it. And there are only so many spaces in jails, and that's expensive for the state. So if you can suggest, make up, create some other path of punishment in exchange for granting an AR, you can do that.
You know, while I'm sitting here listening to you folks, I'm remembering a story I hadn't thought about in years. When I was in college and high school and college, I worked for 4 years at a certain job, and there was a person there who was a big drinker, and he drank openly. And then one day I came in and found out he died. But the key to the story for today's purposes is he had about 20 or 30 cats that were living in his, and it was just the saddest thing. And just hearing you guys talk today, it just brought back a story that moved me tremendously then, and obviously many, many years later, it makes me have even more empathy for the work that you guys are doing. And I appreciate that very much. Back to the statute, unless you have a comment you want to make?
No.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor. Okay. The next part of the statute is what the advocate may do. I think it's an important piece of the puzzle. And the statute provides that the advocate may monitor the case. What is the purpose of the monitoring of the case?
So one of the great things that an advocate brings is one consistent person throughout the whole case. So often, a case may go from prosecutor to prosecutor. Having one person dedicated lends depth and consistency to the knowledge on the case.
Sure.
So that's what monitoring the case reflects.
I hate when I go to the doctor and you have a different doctor every time you go to the group, right? It's a good thing to have one person involved. Next thing, consulting any individual with information that could aid the judge, particularly important, or fact finder in review records relating to the condition of the cat or dog and the defendant's actions, including but not limited to records from animal control officers, very important, veterinarians, and police officers. Talk about that part of the statute, Ken.
You do some of the homework that the prosecutor needs in his file in order to pursue his job effectively. And sometimes they say, I don't have the time to do this. I've got a rape case, I have a burglary case. I don't have time to find out what the state has paid in expenses to care for a dog that's been taken from its owner. Sometimes you need to find a rescue group that will take a dog. So you do a lot of homework.
And the motivation, I mean, you two people are very interested in animal protection, okay? So you're going to spend...
Justice.
Justice, too, animal justice, right. and you two and people who work with you, the volunteers, are going to spend that extra half an hour, the extra hour doing the work. And not that the prosecutors or judges aren't doing their job, but if you have that motivation, right? Do you find that in your students?
It's not just the time, it's the resources, right?
Resources.
And one of the things that makes an advocate so necessary in a case is that these are cases with silent victims who are changing all the time, right? And so, you know, a prosecutor may be used to handling cases with dogs. We had a case involving an egret, right? And I was able to reach out to my college roommate, who's a vet professor, who put me in touch with an avian vet professor at Cornell Vet School, who analyzed the photos and video of what happened and wrote a letter for the court. I don't think that most lawyers have the ability to go down so many rabbit holes in getting extra factual information. In the pit bull case I showed you, we were able to advance a novel legal argument saying the defendant had abandoned the animals just like a couch because he hadn't checked on them for 3 months. So it's the legal and factual additives that an advocate can bring.
And Ken, going back to your resume, I don't think I mentioned this in the show, that you were on the State of Connecticut Board of Veterinary Medicine. Is that correct?
Still am, yes.
Yeah, so when I read that, I said, wait a minute, this man of all seasons, this Renaissance man, the military, the great law firm, tell me what your role is as a lawyer on that particular group.
If someone makes a complaint against a vet that their animal did not get the proper care, they file it, the complaint is researched, and we adjudicate. If there's a finding that the vet should be fined, lose his license, or whatever, we're the adjudicators in that. And we get 2 or 3 cases a year where it goes that far. I'd add to the resource and what an animal advocate brings is in a case that I had where the defendant was claiming to take the charges very serious and it was full of remorse. I found someone who does social media, I don't, and they did the research. And on social media, the same person who was professing to feel guilty and remorseful was saying a whole different thing on social media, was sort of glorifying her attention that she was getting, and all of a sudden it portrayed a whole different person than the one her counsel and herself was presenting to the court. The prosecutor doesn't have time to do that.
You know, it's ironic. When I have a new case, whether it's a divorce case or any other case I have, my first message to my client is stay off Facebook. Of course, Facebook now for the older people because the younger people don't do that anymore. Stay off Instagram because what do we do in cases? You know, when you have, for example, the father who says, oh, I took care of my son, went to every single soccer practice, and they show a picture on Facebook of him talking to some young lady or whatever the thing. So the point is you got to stay off social media, and your person finding the stuff you found was very helpful to your case. We have less than 5 minutes to go, and I want to, before I finish going through the statute, is there anything that I haven't mentioned so far, I'll go to Jessica first, that is something you want to get out to the audience today about what you're doing?
Sure. I think the value that our clinic has brought to cases is really helping all parties get to a more nuanced, specific resolution. And often that involves imposing conditions on a defendant, whether they're at the start, like conditions of release, in the middle, or at the end as probation conditions, to make sure that, you know, it's not just punishment, but it's also opportunities for rehabilitation of a defendant and rehabilitation of an animal victim. So we try to say you can't have additional animals. You've got to surrender your animals. But you also need to engage in animal care education. You need to perhaps make a donation. So we're really looking for a more nuanced case resolution.
Can I ask you a question? You have to get a dog license to own a dog, do you not, in most municipalities?
Not to own it, but if you own a dog, you should have it licensed.
Okay, my question is this. If a person wants to get a dog licensed, is there any kind of record that this person has 5 years ago had these kinds of do you think it's a good idea to have that kind of record?
I think it would be very difficult to get something like that through the legislature. It's another encumbrance on and the expense involved.
I was just asking.
No, it's not
Jessica
something that's likely to happen.
She has a comment on this?
Well, if a case ends up with a conviction, that becomes a matter of public record, that if a town, you know, looked up in the course of licensing, they would see that. And also there's a new possession ban in Connecticut that after any animal cruelty conviction, you can't have an animal for 5 years.
Wait a minute, there's a statute that says that?
Yes.
And, okay, so you have, that means does a town routinely, to your knowledge, do they check these things out? Do you
I
have
don't. I don't.
I don't think so.
Can we have 1 minute left in
Let
the
me
show?
just add to this.
Sure,
and
anything you want to go ahead.
It is one of the things that I require of a defendant who's put on probation is they actually write a letter to the animal control officer, to the probation department, and to the Department of Agriculture stating they understood the terms of their probation. Because what will often happen is, oh, I don't remember that, I made a mistake, and so forth. I want it memorialized in writing so that there's no equivocation later on if they breach the terms of probation. And they also say, I authorize the animal control officer to come and make unannounced inspections. Not to enter my house, but to knock on the door and say, do you have any animals? For the animal control officer, if they're not supposed to, does he see any animals? It just makes the probation more enforceable. Forgive me, you're running
That's
out of
okay.
time.
Jessica, I want to thank you very, very much for coming down from UConn to the show today, and Ken for coming up from Westport, wherever you live in Westport, I believe,
Yeah.
for coming up today. You have enlightened me on a topic that I should have known more about that I didn't, and I enjoy doing my shows the most when it's something I don't really know about. So I want to thank you both. And Ken, you had something?
Thank you for this forum. It's wonderful. If you want to make one pitch, let's get some more animal advocates. Lawyers can volunteer for this in their local judicial area. We need advocates.
And I would suggest if you go onto the website that UConn has, and maybe you can indicate or send a note to Jessica or Ken indicating you'd like to do that and get more involved. I want to thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
It's my pleasure.
Thank
This
you.
has been Bob Potzner on The Bobby O Show with two wonderful guests. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend.